Hi, my name is Richard Leiter, a self-published author of literary fiction, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Thoughts on Writing. So, what I'm about to read you is the most remarkable piece of writing that I personally have ever come across. This is from Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche, Part 9, Section 289. One always hears in the writings of a hermit something of the echo of the desert, something of the whisper and shy vigilance of solitude. In his strongest words, even in his cry, there still resounds a new and more dangerous kind of silence and concealment. He who has sat alone with his soul day and night, year in, year out, in confidential discord and discourse, and in his cave, it may be a labyrinth, but it may be a gold mine, become a cave bear or treasure hunter or a treasure guardian and dragon, finds that his concepts themselves at last acquire a characteristic twilight color, a smell of the depths and of must, something incommunicable and reluctant which blows cold on every passer-by. The hermit does not believe that a philosopher, supposing that a philosopher has always been, first of all, a hermit, has ever expressed his real and final opinions in books. Does one not write books precisely to conceal what lies within us? Indeed, he will doubt whether the philosopher could have final and real opinions at all, whether behind each of his caves there does not and must not lie another deeper cave, a stranger, more comprehensive world beyond the surface, an abyss behind every ground, beneath every foundation. Every philosophy is a foreground philosophy. That is a hermit's judgment. There is something arbitrary in the fact that he stopped, looked back, looked around here, that he stopped digging and laid his spade aside. Here, there is also something suspicious about it. Every philosophy also conceals a philosophy. Every opinion is also a hiding place. Every word also a mask. So it's almost as if Nietzsche is saying that if one comes out of his hermit's cave, so to speak, and decides to communicate with the world by writing a book, that one has almost failed. Why did he stop? Why did he decide to write something now? Why didn't he hold back and go even deeper and then write his book, or go even deeper and then write his book? But he stopped. He said, no more. Let me write now. And Nietzsche finds that questionable. I've never heard of such I've never come across such a profound thought. Every philosophy, he says, conceals a philosophy. One can always go deeper, he says. I recently read Cosmos by Gombrowicz and did a book review. Well, in a sense, Gombrowicz and Cosmos is saying kind of the same thing. No matter how many clues we have to how everything fits together, no matter how many pieces of the puzzle we have, we can never step back far enough to see the puzzle in its entirety, to get a definitive view. Of course, Nietzsche says it much more beautifully and much more directly than Gombrowicz says. I've heard it said that Nietzsche is kind of the precursor or godfather of this this thing called postmodernism, where every Tom, Dick, and Harry is a writer, or can be a writer, or can be a painter, or can be a poet, merely by dint of the fact that they've scribbled something on a piece of paper. That makes them relevant and a poet. Well, I would have to say that this passage that I've just read surely makes hay out of that concept. No postmodernist or godfather of postmodernism would ever have written a passage like the one I just read to you. Nietzsche is talking about restraint here, holding back, and that's kind of the opposite of postmodernism in fiction and in art, as far as I'm concerned. So, what's the difference between philosophy and literature? Art is literature, art is fiction. Well, to me, philosophy is all about making some kind of a definitive statement, revealing a final truth. And as Nietzsche says, there is no such thing. You can always go deeper. However, I think the advantage that literature has over philosophy is that, yes, literature can certainly have a philosophy embedded within it. However, whatever the philosophy is, it is framed within the context of that particular work of fiction, that particular story. And so that guards that the philosophy contained within the story will never degenerate into what Nietzsche calls foreground. Yes, every story is a hermetically sealed. Every story or work of fiction is a hermetically sealed off world, and within that world, the philosophy or the vision of life is viable. It's only when you remove the philosophy from the work of fiction and are making some kind of a grand general statement about life that it always degenerates into foreground. For instance, Tolstoy, in his latter years, kind of had a different view of what literature was. He thought that literature in his later years should really be kind of like a sermon. It should always instill some kind of a moral lesson in the reader. He wrote The Death of Ivan Ilyich in his latter stage, in his latter career. And there is something of a sermon in it, something of a moral preaching, in spite of the fact that it's a masterpiece. Now, the fact that that Tolstoy had a different idea about what literature should be in his latter years from his middle years doesn't mean that Anna Karenina and War and Peace are invalid because he changed his idea of what the novel should be or what fiction should be. And the reason that these books are still valid is because they are works of fiction. They are not merely philosophical tracts. So art saves philosophy from itself. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.